Hey y'all, what's up? It's your girl Malika checking in with another episode of From the Block podcast. So y'all, all right, college, such an interesting time in so many of our lives. See, with it being an interesting time, and it can also be a very expensive time. So you learn some things, you can also lose some things. Now, there are mixed reviews, if higher education is actually worth it. And although there is a lot of discourse surrounded around, should one actually go to college, the $1 million question still remains unanswered. Is college actually worth it? So please give it up for a very, very special guest, the one, the only Dr. Vibe. Make some noise, y'all.
Thank you, Malika. Good
Now,
to be here.
Don't be so humble now. I need you to tell the people your credentials because this is, some serious
Okay.
stuff.
Well, okay. I have a PhD. My field is policy history, so I have a PhD in policy history. I do a lot of work in Black studies, Latino studies, and most recently I've been doing work maybe in the past decade in study abroad. So I'm interested in a lot of issues related to higher education, helping students kind of maximize their experiences, and I'm excited to be here with you.
I'm excited to have you. So, Dr. Vite, CNN published an article last year and said only 35% of Black Americans have associate degrees or higher, which are essential for economic and social mobility. And Black student enrollment has declined over the last decade. So, why do you think education is considered a taboo topic in a lot of Black and brown communities?
That's a good question. I mean, and those numbers are complicated because one of the things that I would say we need more of is we need more Black brown students going to community college and probably less students going to like a traditional 4-year degree program. I'm not saying I want to discourage Black and brown students from doing that, but for financial reasons like the cost and just in general, people's career ambitions has to align with the type of educational experience that they're seeking. And to your question, like why is it a taboo? It's complicated. So I'm a historian, so I'm got to tell you, this began all the years back after slavery. No, but for real, after the Civil War, what happens is one of the first things when African Americans obtained their freedom, one of the first things that they pursued was education.
Mm-hmm.
And formerly enslaved persons were willing to do anything to get it, often, particularly in the context of the state of Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, they had to do it under cover of the night because there was a lot of resentment towards them for seeking to learn how to read, to write, etc. So they were literally in situations where they were threatened and terrorized by the Klan, other vigilante groups in the South that did not want them to receive their education. So Black folk have placed historically a high level of respect on education. And that level of respect for education was because we saw it as the access way, like how we could get access to opportunities. Mm-hmm. And I think fundamentally that still is true about education today. Why it has become more taboo, so to speak, is there's a lot of people that do not see a direct connection between education and making money. And that is a different question. It's a related question, but it's a different question. Nobody ever told you that just because you're a good student that you would be a millionaire. And I think a lot of people in our society have an idea that the more that you go to school, the more money that you should make, that there's like a clear correlation.
Mm-hmm.
There's complex reasons for why that sentiment has emerged, because the whole purpose of college has never been to make a person rich. It has been to educate a person, to round out one's education. One of the benefits of being a well-rounded and well-educated person is you know more things, you have access to more opportunities, and you have a greater likelihood of making more money. But I think where the disconnect comes is a lot of people see a direct connection between a degree and becoming rich, which I think is not accurate. And I think that also hurts kind of the importance of education.
So what's your rebuttal when, because this is a common phrase with the way how this economy is going, if you don't have a degree, you're going to be messed up. So what's your rebuttal to that statement then?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's absolutely true. The statistics bear this out. If you go to college, you will be better off economically over the course of your life than the person that's sitting next to you that did not go to college. You will make more money than that person sitting next to you, the average person. That is absolutely true. What is also true is that you do not need to go to college, particularly in our current demographic shift, to make good money. You can do a variety of trades. And there's a stigma that I think needs to be addressed about trades. Air
We're gonna talk about
conditioning,
it.
installation,
gonna talk about
auto
that soon.
mechanics, etc. Like there's a stigma that people don't want to work with their hands. They think that I want a white collar job. That's better. But we actually have a large opening in a lot of positions that do not require a college degree that are good paying jobs.
So let me ask you this then. So as you know, lack of education and resources are a plague in many low income minority communities. So what can be done if there is something that can be done to bring more education, which will eventually lead to more resources for lower income communities?
I think there's several layers to that. On one piece, people do not really respect education as an area for personal development and growth. Most people, and it begins, I would say, probably around the third or fourth grade, are acculturated. This is not a black thing. We just tend to see it more pronounced because we are under the microscope of American society. But the United States overall, people do not place a high value on education. Comparatively speaking to, say, other countries in Western Europe, Asia, even less developed countries in the world, Americans do not really respect education as an area of high value. What bears this out is kind of like the way that people think about teachers, the kind of emphasis that people place on high academic performance, the blame that they place. Like if there's a lack of performance in school, it's not the student, as most countries will point out. It's the level of achievement comes down to like individual aspiration, what a student is willing to do and study. But in the American system, because of a variety of factors, we tend to blame those outcomes on the educational institution itself or the teachers itself, right? And I think that is part of the problem, Malika. The second piece that is close to it, because you have a fundamental, some people have written, like Richard Hofstadter wrote, that the United States is just anti-intellectual by nature, that we don't place a high emphasis on the value of ideas. We place a high emphasis on the value of money, like on how to make money. And that causes, I think, a tension between public education, private education, and kind of the aspirations of the average American
So that means
citizen.
that there's a clash between capitalism and higher education.
Yeah, I think the values of education with the values of like the average American citizen are definitely in
So,
clash,
but when you
yeah.
said that the most Americans don't value higher education, does that exclude the immigrants who migrated to this land? Like, are you like when you say Americans, you mean just strictly like, okay, you were born in America, this is all your culture, or do you think like people that come from different countries that have been here for decades, they eventually adopt the mentality that education is just not really worth it?
So I'm being real slick with the way I'm using the term education, because what people value is a degree. People value the credential. When people don't value is the process that goes into it. So what we have is a mentality that if I can purchase that credential, that paper, paper gets paper. That's where the value is. So what's happening that I think is particularly dangerous, and in the context of immigrants to the United States adopting, say, that American mentality, is if a person has the paper but does not have the skills to back it up, when they're put into the global marketplace with other individuals that have both the papers and the skills, then they're going to lose out to other people. So let me give you an example. If the average American has to compete against, say, a recent immigrant from India who has a very different and specialized training in computer technology, for example, out of many different fields, right? Any company that's hiring people, if they were to choose, and I'm making a generalization here, this is not for every case, but if they have to choose between paying less for a person that has that same degree and that same skill set versus paying more. And I mean, they're going to say, "Why don't even come here? We'll export a lot of that work there."
Yeah.
Because if it only comes down to like the paper and the skill itself, they're saying, "Okay, that's a better way." Another way you can think about it is like, say you're a German American and you immigrate to the United States after you complete school, you have a degree, say in engineering or something. What people are not looking at also is that you have that culture. You also have that social background in Germany where the country will pay for your education. Like, if you're a German citizen, you go through that system, you get a degree, you're educated at the cost of the taxpayers because they invest that in the country as a whole. That frees you up for opportunities around the world without student debt and all the other obligations that American students take on. So we're competing now like in a global marketplace in that sense. Meanwhile, American students are overburdened by student debt, the rising cost of higher education, the average American student is working 20 plus hour jobs. Some are working full time, like 40-hour jobs. So there's no way that type of student, if that is going to be the average student for decades to come, is going to be competing with students from other parts of the world where education is substantially cheaper. They're investing much more in the process itself, and they have a completely different set of values when it comes to learning versus the commodity of the degree itself. So, I mean, there's a lot of complicated issues there that relate not only to the value of the credential, but the value of the process and the role of societies in creating kind of that culture where education can be a tool for development.
I was listening to Dr. Umar's interview on the Breakfast Club.
What did he say?
And he said an issue in our community is that we don't promote getting a trade as opposed to getting a higher education. And as a result, that's why there's so many dropouts. So what are your thoughts on that statement?
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Umar on that. I think the problem we have is so many of us historically have been pushed into trades when people had the capacity to be great artists, great lawyers, great doctors, great writers, great engineers. But because of the issue of race in the United States, Black people have traditionally been fast-tracked for like manual labor jobs. And the problem with that is there is nothing wrong with manual labor jobs, but we look down our nose and we kind of look down at people who don't have a college degree, and I think that needs to stop. So I think if that's where your skill set is and that's where your interest is, it makes no sense for you to go to college to pursue a degree in kind of like advanced STEM fields if that's not where your interest is. Why not, if you're not interested in that area, why not just get a job working in carpentry? There's an explosion of construction jobs, etc. I think the problem is when people are forced to go in those areas, like fast track in those areas. I think that's where the issue comes.
But you see some people, on the flip side of that, some people, they go to school to follow their passion versus profit. So then you'll see, the individuals that major in philosophy or, fashion marketing. Some people have mixed reviews on that. Do you feel as if they're setting themselves up for failure if they follow their passions?
I think if you have a degree in computer science or you have a degree in basket weaving or whatever, it comes down to how you spent your time developing your skills, because the credential is no longer enough. It doesn't matter if you're in a highly marketable, quote unquote, highly sought after field or not. The credential is no longer enough. You have to have proof in the receipt, so to speak now. Why? Because everybody has a degree now. Like a college degree is the new high school diploma. So you have to be able to show those skills. Another thing is that
that's very interesting.
There has been like emphasis on quote unquote what degrees are of value and what degrees are not. And people have really beat up on degrees that are not pre-professional in nature. And the problem with that is that is just against what all the data are saying. All the data are saying if you get a degree in English, philosophy, history, all these quote unquote traditional fields in the humanities, liberal arts, etc., that have been there from pretty much the beginning of the experience of college. Like these were the first areas that people studied, when they enrolled in colleges for hundreds of years. If you get a degree in those areas, all the data are saying that you're fine. Over the course of your life, you're going to make just as much money. You're going to be okay. Now, I mean, like if you're in like some hyper specialized area like aeronautical engineering or something like that, yeah, you're going to get a huge benefit when you graduate. You're going to make a lot of money. If you have the skills to back up the degree, you're going to make a lot of money. But over the trajectory, that's going to flatten out. And those people with degrees in quote unquote traditional areas and liberal arts, they're going to catch right up with you. So now if you want to compare apples to apples, that's the case. But if you're comparing apples to oranges, like everyone's like, okay, well, what about law or what about medicine? So that's extended, education, so you're building on years and years. So those people are going to make more money over the course of their lifetimes. That's absolutely true. But back to the fundamental problem, I think that there's a misguided attempt to focus the blame on what's going on so-called useless degrees, when I think it relates much more to what I was emphasizing before. If you have the skills and you have the competitive global outlook, you have the passion, a degree is going to serve you well. If you don't have those elements, it's going to be very difficult to survive.
Like the issue, well, not really an issue, but just a question. It's just, as you stated earlier, that the average college student, they're working over 20 hours, going to classes, taking care of their personal responsibilities. How do you even develop skills when that's your everyday life?
How can you study for a philosophy exam, a chemistry exam, when you're working at Walmart like 30 hours a week?
I won't even develop skills.
I mean, I think that's a very important question to ask, because it has not always been like that. And that change is something that came about within the last two generations. Like we begin to see that demographic develop in the early 2000s. I would say it become much more common for students to do that. We always had people who are working like part-time, but working part-time could cover a larger portion of your tuition and fees then back in the day than it can now. So people are compelled to do it, right? So this was a societal decision, is what I'm getting at. That as a society, we decided that it's okay for states to divest the monies that traditionally have gone to public colleges and universities and to spend that on other stuff. It's okay for us to focus schools as revenue generating institutions. And by that, I mean public universities and private ones never really had a mandate to make money. They were institutions that served the public interest. But now people see colleges and universities as places that are revenue generating. So their mission has shifted that they should be businesses and make money, right? And I'm not saying that colleges have never had endowments where they had more money coming in than that they were giving out. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that the academic structure and organization of units is now often configured in a way that prioritizes making money for the institution rather than serving the public good. And there's complex reasons for that, but I think that's unfair to students. And at the end, I could say that one of the major causes for that is that colleges and universities by and large are no longer run by faculty. They're run by administrators that are kind of separated from the day-to-day experiences of teaching and research. So you have kind of like this administrative layer that copies the same format of Fortune 500 companies, right? So when you're paying for this huge administrative overhead and you're paying for Division I athletics, I'm gonna knock on some sacred cows today, that detracts from that adds to the cost of college, number one, and then it detracts from the experience of learning. And then it pushes the economic burden on students, So you got to ask yourself, if you visit a lot of colleges and universities around the world, as I have, and you look at their dorms and you look at what's going on, their campus activities, you're not going to find huge football stadiums filled with people on the weekend. You're not going to find lazy rivers and climbing walls. You're going to find a library with a lot of books, very small Spartan rooms with very little accommodations. But at the end of that, students are going to have the tools, the skills, and the degree without hardly any student loan debt. There are some exceptions and there are some crises that are taking place, in Western Europe because of some changes. But these changes are changes that have attempted to model the American system by privatizing different aspects of the college experience and pushing it on students as individuals instead of thinking about it as a societal investment. So I mean, that's a lot to think about, and it's complicated. It's a complicated problem to solve, but it also is a collective decision in the way that we think about the college experience in the United States.
So when you had said earlier that the college degree is the new high school diploma, were you referring to strictly just like bachelor's, or even, reaching for the moon, aiming for the stars, getting your master's and PhD?
Yeah, so when my colleague and I wrote this book years ago, like a decade now, we were talking about undergraduate degrees, and we were noticing some trends but now what we're seeing is that many people are like advancing in the graduate degrees becoming, necessary before companies will even look at you or think about you for a job.
And it's interesting that you even said that, because that was one of the main reasons why I decided to pursue my master's. And I know like a lot of people were like, what's the point of even doing that? But I just, even when I graduated undergrad, I did my undergrad at Georgia State, it just didn't feel like enough. And that was even before I even did any research about the importance of, obtaining a master's and just different things of that nature. We remember walking across the stage, I was happy, but deep down inside, I was just like, it's just, I need more. Like, it just don't feel like enough. So it's really interesting that you made that point.
Yeah, and of course, I want more students to get an education. I want more students to get advanced education, but I want also students to have the right fit, And if a student feels that they have to pursue graduate education just because everyone else is doing it, I don't think that's not the right reason, so to speak. It's you're being forced to. Like, everyone should know how to read and write, but does everyone need to write a master's thesis or,
50 pages of it?
I mean, I don't necessarily think that's necessary. It comes down to just the way that our economy is structured and personal and collective decisions that we've made as a country on what education should look like.
Well, how do you, like, when do you think that, well, you were stated when, but what do you think was even the driving force of that shift in society to where the bachelor's degrees are the new high school diplomas? Because not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but after reading some stuff online, I saw that when more black and brown students started obtaining degrees, that's when higher ups were like, oh, gotta up it up now.
Well, it's complicated, but what I will say is that there are data to suggest that as more black women in particular, let me just talk about black women for a moment. Black women are one of the most highly educated demographics within the United States in terms of advanced degrees. So black women are disproportionately represented among persons who hold advanced degrees, but they're also disproportionately paid. So although black women hold a disproportionate amount of advanced degrees, they still receive less in comparison to white persons that either have the same degree or less in a chosen industry, right? So there's something that is going on in response to your question around that the degree itself, even the skills that one presents, are still not enough really to shake kind of the perception of race and its role and how it operates in the American labor market. In addition to that, you have black women that are taking on student loan debt to pay for their education, and there's a whole political, I guess, battlefield right now over student loan forgiveness and why student loans shouldn't be forgiven. According to some people, I never had a student loan, so why should? I mean, I never had an agricultural loan, but it's an investment in the society as a whole, right? Mm-hmm. Like if we invest in farmers, we give low-cost agricultural loans for them to expand, buy equipment, etc., then we all get to eat and we're all better off. And the same thing should be thought about education. If we don't make collective investments as a society and education, guess what? China's making those investments. India is making those investments. All the nations in Western Europe, South America are making those investments. And the American taxpayer is like, well, I'm not going to pay that. Well, guess what? You're going to be left behind. And then we're going to have to increasingly export parts of our labor force abroad, either in the form of outsourcing, as has long been the trend, or, and I want to make clear, I don't have any problems with people coming to the United States to work. That's not the problem. I think where the problem is relates to one of access that we've been talking about. And how do you pay for it? Like the reason that we're unable to graduate enough folks in STEM areas. And by the way, we're focusing on kind of like the STEM crisis. There's a lot of data and discussion on, is there really a STEM crisis, or is this just kind of like, is this something that is a marketing production just to, generate more revenues, etc. So, I mean, the problem is we have the infrastructure in the United States to meet all of our STEM needs, right? But the reason is, why are we not investing in STEM educators and in STEM education in a way to produce those graduates? Well, it comes back to kind of the economic questions. Are American taxpayers willing to make those investments? Are companies willing to make those investments in hiring American educated engineers, or is it cheaper just to pick up somebody from around the world?
It's way cheaper, and that's what they're doing.
Exactly. So we have to ask those kinds of questions anytime like the workforce dynamic comes up, when companies, we need more of this, we need more of that. Well, I mean, I think my point has been made, but just real quickly, and another way to think about it is this. For the majority of higher education, there's been an emphasis on liberal arts. Kind of, you expose students to a broad set of skills: critical thinking, learning, creativity, problem solving, etc. And that layer of skills, they have argued historically, is the basis for developing more targeted skills in any given area, right? In the last 15 years, what we've seen is a shift towards professional training, where you are training students to be workers. So the emphasis, you're training college students to be workers. Well, if you're training students to be workers, who should be paying for that? Shouldn't the companies that are demanding those skills be the one that's paying for that? Can some of that take place in the job? Do you have to, in other words, do you have to take out a student loan to pay for a job in H&R? Shouldn't that be taken on by the corporation, especially if they're going to demand very, very specific skill sets? So I'll say this to say, what many colleges have been doing is they've been rearranging and reconfiguring the traditional core of general education and saying that we need more workforce development prioritized skills. And what are employers saying now that we've seen like 15 years of this process? They're saying all the stuff that we asked for, we're not getting. So what are they asking for? Better writing, better communication, critical thinking, creative skills, and creative problem solving. We're not getting all of that. So you mean to tell me for the past 15 years, we've been attacking kind of these traditional areas where critical thinking is emphasized, critical writing, history, philosophy, etc., those liberal arts traditional areas. And we've been replacing them with quote unquote workforce specific development courses that are geared towards particular jobs and industry. And now corporations are saying these students can't write. These students don't know how to work with each other. These students. So, I mean, whose fault is that? And where did the problem come from, right?
So, Dr. Vaught, you had mentioned earlier that bachelor's degrees are the new high school diplomas.
Mm-hmm.
So, when do you think that transition began to where, okay, now bachelor's degree is not enough?
The long answer for that is, following World War II, there was something that was known as the GI Bill, where vets that were coming back from the war were encouraged to go to college it would be heavily subsidized by the federal government. Mm-hmm. Also housing, et cetera, all of that. So you had a lot of people just upping their ability to educate themselves and get advanced. But you also had a lot of people that said, nope, I'm good. I'm going to get a union job and I'm going to work in this metal shop or whatever. and that one salary was enough to pay for their family.
Mm-hmm.
But that begins like a little bump in the number of persons who are going to pursue college degrees. Then there's another bump that comes in the 1960s and 70s as women began to pursue higher education degrees. And there had always been women's colleges and women in many schools that allowed kind of co-ed status. But you have a lot of women going to school, and kind of the proportion shifts so that by the time we get to the early 90s, I would say maybe even by the late 80s, the average college campus has more women in attendance than men. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not against that. I think it's a great thing. But what happens is there's many more people in the college market, so to speak. And that just raises the stakes for potential employers to saying, oh, you don't have a college degree? She has one. She has one. Well, why don't you have one? So that kind of introduces that new standard so that my generation, we came up, I'm Gen X, I'm telling on my age, but that's the experience that we had. Like you had to have a college degree. It was kind of expected to be a norm.
So do you think masters and PhDs, do you feel like that's what's going to set you apart these days, apart from just only getting a bachelor's degree?
No. I think what you're doing right here, this conversation we're having with you using this skill set that you've developed, I think that is what sets you apart.
No, thank you for that. Because I do remember even when I first announced that I was getting my master's, and I had a lot of people say, I mean, is it really worth it? Why would you even want to go back to school? You already got the first degree. And honestly, I feel like I've been in the program now for almost 2 years, and I feel like the skills that I've obtained from just doing the coursework, having conversations with professors, just different things of that nature, I just feel like it's just set me apart so much. And even I remember when I graduated from undergrad, I went to Georgia State. And although, of course, I was so happy when I was walking across the stage, but internally I knew that getting that bachelor's just was not enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're doing is proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a background. I don't know what's your bachelor in?
English.
So you have a background in English? No, don't laugh. That's heavy. And American studies. So you're saying I'm a critical thinker. I'm also a creative thinker. But everyone else is saying I have that too. But you're saying this is my proof of concept. Check out this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That's what sets you apart. And when everyone has that same credential, people are looking for where's the receipt. So this is kind of like your real receipt. Stuff like this is important. I'm a big advocate of education abroad. That's very important. Those are things that set you apart. And your ability to navigate multiple languages, multiple cultures, that's a major, major advantage as well.
So because you had made a comment earlier as well that Black women are one of the most educated demographics in America. Why do you think there is this, I don't want to say disconnect, but why do you think typically when we talk about compared to Black men and Black women, who's receiving higher education, who's going out their way to, constantly set the bar, why do you think Black men kind of fall short of that?
Ooh. You need a whole episode for this. There's a lot around this. Some of it is socialization. Some of it has to do with the role of gender in the educational process. And for better or worse, and I think it's for worse, that a lot of people perceive education as being something that's a feminine trait. So when you get to a certain point in your educational journey, unless young men and young boys are acculturated to it, then they kind of see it. I'm not into that. Also, kind of, there had been historically an intentional presence with African American men to push them to pursue more manually oriented types of labor as well. So I think those are some of the reasons for that. They don't explain all of it, but I think there's some of it.
So with your book, Dr. Vaught, College, Is It a Lousy Investment? Negotiating the Hidden Cost of Higher Education. according to educationdata.org, Black and African American college graduates owe an average of $25,000 or more in student loan debt compared to white college graduates. And also, Black and African American student borrowers are the most likely to struggle financially due to student loan debt, making monthly payments of over $250. Asian college graduates are the fastest to repay their loan debt and the most likely to earn a salary that exceeds their student loan debt balance. That was a lot. How do we begin to take the first step in becoming financially responsible when achieving higher education?
That's okay. So there's a lot, but there's two things that I would recommend that are very important. The first thing is to think about education not as an individual achievement, but as a communal responsibility and investment. And one of the reasons that Asian Americans, there's a lot of noise in the data, but one of the reasons that Asian Americans are able to achieve academically in ways that not only African Americans, but compare that to white Americans as well, are not, is because fundamentally they take a communal approach to education versus African Americans take a hyper individual approach that we, kind of just following American culture. So that communal approach influences everything from attitudes that they have. There's a communal responsibility to educate. So there's attitudes that are shared versus kind of, it's you. If you don't get it, nope. If I don't get it and you don't get it, or you get it, then I have a responsibility to help you understand. If you got this wrong on your test, but I got it right, then I have a responsibility to share with you and help you. We just don't have that type of mentality because we're more competitive, because we kind of copy and paste.
But where do you think that even stems from? Because we've talked about this previously before, that within our community, it's really no sense of community. And other community groups, that's why a lot of them are really far ahead. I know that's going to, ruffle some feathers, but we've talked about it before.
Yeah. And it influenced, like if you wanted to talk about Latino Americans as well, there's a layer there. I wouldn't look at the stats related to higher education, but I would look at the stats related to entrepreneurship. So the reasons that in both Asian and Latin American populations, their entrepreneurship rates are higher than African Americans is for largely the same reasons. Like we are competing. If you start a podcast, I'm going to be directly competing now against your podcast instead of saying, okay, you come on my podcast for 4 shows. I'll come on your podcast for 4 shows. We'll share our audience. We'll grow together. That is largely kind of the entrepreneurial experience of many Asian Americans and Latino American entrepreneurs. But African Americans tend to be much more competitive in their entrepreneurial as well as academic pursuits. And I think it stems from education because we are educated both informally and formally to compete with each other to get rich. You don't get rich by collaborating. You get rich by finding a way to siphon, more for yourself than we're sharing with everyone else, right? But I think success is defined in communal terms much more common in Asian and Latino populations than it is in African American population. And that's not to say there's problems and there's other racial issues that are going on because there certainly are. But I wanted just to give those couple of examples.
So some people go to school to follow their passions versus profit. And some people, they'll get criticized for saying, well, I majored in philosophy or, I majored in fashion marketing. So are they actually setting themselves up for failure?
No, because I think this, anyone who is only in pursuit of economic benefit is not going to be able to sustain that for a very long time. They're either going to burn out. That opportunity will dissipate. It'll disappear. Just because there's a market for something right now does not mean there's going to be a market for it in 4 years. I remember when I came to Atlanta, I wanted to learn Ruby on Rails. I wanted to learn how to code Ruby on Rails. So I was going to this workshop trying to learn that, et cetera. Nobody's talking about Ruby on Rails now because anything that's hot now is not always going to be hot. Now, if I had a passion to code, I don't care because I'm going to jump on whatever the next thing is and learn that. I may invent what the next thing is. But if I'm just pursuing the dollar, it's like that when that little boy puts $1 on a hook and on a string and then just pulls it, and then you see the person constantly trying to grab it, and then you look up and you spent 20 years of your life pursuing $1, and it's not really what you wanted to do. So I think you need passion to complement something that you're good at, in addition to something that you can make money doing. And often, I'll just say this, often if you're passionate about something and you can make yourself really, really good at it, the way to make money with it emerges. But if you just focus on making money, you tend not to get really good at something. You just tend to be good at, following get rich quick schemes,
Yeah. So do you believe that liberal arts and humanities degrees are a waste of time in dying out of the university system?
I think that they're dying out, but I also think that I see a lot of promise with some institutions beginning to say, okay, this blip in the last 15 or 20 years has not been working out well, and we're beginning to see kind of the long-term effects of disregarding these things. There's this concept called like lateral effects. So we're interested in like linear effects. So if I push this button, I expect this to come out. I press this on the vending machine and this comes out. But there are lateral effects. Sometimes you do things and they have benefits that manifest in ways that you did not expect. Mm-hmm. And the liberal arts is one of those areas. So science education is also one of those areas as well. So people are pursuing knowledge, and as a result of pursuing knowledge, they don't know what the end of that is, but oftentimes new ideas come that happen to be very profitable. But you couldn't have gone into it thinking that I'm going to make a lot of money doing this. It's a lateral effect that comes up as new opportunities arise. So I think kind of the broad-based aspect of a liberal arts education is it turns out to be the most valuable. But when you try to just go to the golden goose and say, I don't need to learn how to read, I'm not reading all that literature, I'm not doing all that writing, I'm not studying all the philosophy, I just want to know how to make the money, you tend to cut the goose open, lo and behold, there's no gold inside.
Yeah. Cutting corners.
Yep.
And I like the phrase that you kept on saying earlier, that you don't go to college to get rich. You go to college to learn the skills and apply those skills so eventually you can be properly compensated. Because I feel like a lot of people, they go into this mindset of, I'm going to strictly do this and this will exactly get me money and that's all I need. But it's way more complex than that, which I feel like a lot of people don't realize. But shout out to Dr. Vaught for the gems. So I guess to just close out, Dr. Vaught, as you know, the American dream is subjective for some people. And you know the saying that if you work hard, you'll get what you want, and that's that. But as we know, that's pretty subjective. Do you think college is tied to the American dream?
Its problems. The American dream was never sustainable. And by sustainable, it was never achievable for everybody in this country, let alone the world. Mm-hmm. Like everyone, if you ask a person in the world, like I take students to Uganda, I take students across Latin America, South America, etc. The average person wants to come to the United States because they think of American dream. I can get a big house in the suburbs. I can get 2 cars. I can do. That's not sustainable. That's not even sustainable for the people who currently live in this country. So I think that we have to have realistic expectations based on what's sustainable. I think everyone can have access to good housing. Mm-hmm. I think everyone should have access to good housing, good health care, and a decent education, food, quality of life. I mean, all those I think are attainable. But I think the materialistic pursuit of getting wealthy and making it rich, I think is causing a lot of It's nothing wrong with having ambition.
Absolutely.
I will never tell a person don't make as much money as you can. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it can become dangerous at a point when that sidelines our responsibilities to each other and our society at large. So when education is more interested in generating revenue than preparing students to be citizens that ask those deeper questions, then I think that's when we have a problem. And I think that the cost of higher education today is not sustainable. And students cannot pay that cost. And then, I mean, one thing that I'll just end on this, right? We don't think about this. We're asking 18-year-olds coming from high school to sign the next 30 years of their life away.
But then on the flip side, if they want to go to the bank and get a loan for a business, they have to go through all these steps.
Right. You can you fill out that FAFSA, you get a loan quick. Boom. And that type of debt is very difficult to erase. It impacts so many things. It impacts when you're going to get married, if you decide to get married, where you're going to live, if you're going to be able to have kids, are you going to be able to take care of your aging parents? If you're offered a new job in a different part of the country, are you able to move? Are you able to accept that job? Student loans affect like all of that. And that's tied to the cost of higher education. It's tied to our values. It's tied to so many things. And to come back to this issue of the American dream, I think we have to dream big as Americans, but part of that dream has to be a collective dream about what society we want to live in, not just a dream about, how big a house I can get or how nice a car I can get, which I think people have a right to nice things. You will never hear me say don't have aspirations to have nice things, but we always have to ask ourselves, at what cost?
At what cost?
At what cost?
Amen to that. So, Dr. Bob, we need you for part 2. It's more something I want to ask you. It's just we're crunch for time, but I need you back.
Would love to.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing, Malika, doing great work. So keep up the podcast and keep up with good work.
Thank you. So, okay, a couple of things. You make sure you get Dr. Vought's book, Is College a Lousy Investment? You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on, you have a website too, correct?
The website is going through changes, but so check out Amazon, and there's another recent book that we came out, The Roadmap to Investing in Yourself. Check out that as well. I think you'll like that if you like this one.
You can also follow Dr. Vaught on all social media platforms
at mad.prof, mad.prof, PROF.
And make sure if you go to KSU, you register for his classes in the fall.
Thank you.
All right, so make sure you already know what to do. Make sure you follow us on all social media platforms at From the Block Podcast. All right, bye. I need you back, Dr. Vaught.